At Christmas dinner, right as the candles flickered against the gold-rimmed plates, and everyone lifted their glasses for a toast, my younger sister leaned back in her chair, pointed at me, and shouted, "If you can't live like a normal adult, then go live in the streets." Her words snapped through the dining room like a breaking bone. The room fell silent except for the soft crackle of rosemary roasting in the oven. My parents didn't defend me. They didn't even flinch. My mother looked down at her napkin. My father sighed, long and disappointed, like my existence ruined the holiday spirit. And in that moment, standing beside a tree covered in ornaments I had bought for them years ago, I realized something colder than the December air outside. They had no idea I earned $75 million a year. No idea I owned properties they drove past without noticing. No idea the woman they called useless could buy this house outright using only last quarter's dividends. Still, I didn't say a word. Not yet, because some truths aren't spoken. They are revealed. And when mine finally surfaced, it would turn their perfect little world inside out. I sat back down slowly, pushing my chair in with steady hands, even as my pulse hammered beneath my skin. The table looked beautiful. Snow-white runner, polished silver, evergreen sprigs. But beauty didn't disguise poison. My family had a long tradition of decorating dysfunction with twinkling lights. My mother cleared her throat first. "Can we not ruin the holiday spirit tonight?" she muttered, though her eyes flicked toward me with quiet accusation, as if I was the one who had created the storm. My sister Brielle smirked over her wine glass. "I'm just saying what everyone else is thinking." Her fiancé, a man with a jaw too sharp for his own sincerity, gave her thigh a little squeeze as though she'd just been brave, heroic even. I stared at my plate, hearing my father breathe through his nose with the same disappointment he'd carried since I was old enough to understand tone. "It's Christmas," he said. "Let's not make this about her decisions." Her decisions, her irresponsibility, her failure to meet their expectations. They had built an entire vocabulary around who they believed I was. Not one word of it true. I cut a piece of turkey, not because I wanted to eat, but because having something to do with my hands made the air less suffocating. The gravy was rich, the cranberry sauce bright, but every bite tasted metallic. Childhood memories of Christmas dinners flickered through my mind like old photographs, my sister glowing at the center of attention, my parents doting over her newest accomplishment, while I sat quietly at the end of the table beside the coat closet, pretending it didn't bother me. "When are you going to do something real with your life?" my father asked suddenly, as if he couldn't hold the thought inside another moment. I blinked slowly. "I do plenty." "Online nonsense," he snapped. "Consulting, freelancing, whatever it is you claim to do. It's embarrassing. Your sister owns her own clinic. She contributes to society." "And I don't?" My voice was calm. Too calm. My mother pursed her lips. "Honey, volunteering doesn't count as a career." I nearly laughed. If only they knew how many millions I'd donated this year. But I stayed still, letting them talk, letting them paint me with assumptions, letting them reveal, once again, exactly who they were. "It's not complicated," Brielle chimed in. "Some people work, some people drift. You drift." She sipped her wine. "And then expect us to pretend everything's fine." I stared at her, at the woman my parents had raised to believe entitlement was virtue. "You always come home with problems," she added casually. "Never solutions." "The only problem," my father said, pointing his fork at me, "is that you refuse to grow up." Heat rushed through my chest, but on the outside I remained perfectly composed. Years of practice had taught me how to keep my expression neutral, even when cut open. If I told them the truth, about my companies, my investments, my philanthropic partnerships, they would twist it, minimize it, weaponize it. They would claim credit for sacrifices they never made, They would latch onto my success like vines around a tree trunk, suffocating it while pretending to support it. No, they didn't deserve the truth yet. They didn't deserve access to the woman I had become. My silence agitated them. My father set down his fork with a heavy clink. "Do you even hear us? Do you understand what we're saying?" "Yes," I replied softly. "Very clearly." My mother let out a shaky sigh. "We're worried about you." A half smile touched my lips. "You're worried about how I make you look." She froze, lips parted. Because it was true. They cared about reputation, not me. Before anyone could respond, the oven timer beeped, chiming through the tension like an oblivious bell. My mother leapt up gratefully. "Let me get the rolls," she said, practically fleeing the table. I leaned back, my hands resting in my lap. The dining room windows reflected the scene like a cruel mirror. The garland, the warm lights, the family gathered around a feast, and me, the outsider even in my own childhood home. The doorbell rang. My father grunted. "I swear if that's another delivery." But when he opened the door, a gust of frozen air swept in along with my cousin Avery, cheeks flushed from the wind. She carried a stack of wrapped gifts and the kind of gentle, observant expression I had relied on since we were kids. "Sorry I'm late," she said, stepping inside. When she reached the table, she hugged everyone, but she hugged me a second longer. A knowing squeeze, a whisper of solidarity. We grew up together. She knew the truth of my childhood, the truth of this house. "Did I miss anything?" she asked lightly as she sat down. Brielle smirked. "Just Mara being dramatic." I felt Avery's gaze snap to my sister, sharp, protective. Then she turned to me. "You okay?" "Yes," I said, "always." But she didn't buy it. She never did. Dinner continued, conversations weaving, splintering, circling me like cautious wolves. My father bragged about Brielle's clinic. My mother gushed about a women's charity luncheon she helped organize. They asked Avery about her job, her apartment, her dating life. They didn't ask me anything. And then, as plates emptied and wine flowed, my father decided to deliver the yearly verdict. "We want you to stay with us until you figure things out," he said, "but you need to take accountability. You're 32, Mara. This—" He gestured at me vaguely. "Whatever you're doing isn't working." I looked at him steadily. "It's working just fine." "You don't look fine," Brielle said sweetly. My mother nodded. "You look tired." "Exhausted," my father added. "I'm tired," I said, "because I drove 3 hours to be insulted at your dining table." My mother gasped softly, pressing her fingers to her chest. "We are trying to help you." "No," I said. "You're trying to control a version of me that doesn't exist anymore." The room fell quiet. Avery looked from me to them, reading the landscape. My father inhaled sharply. "If you don't want our help, then maybe you don't belong here at all." My sister's eyes sparkled. "Told you, she should live in the streets." My mother said nothing. She didn't even scold her. Something inside me clicked into place. Quiet, final. I folded my napkin, laid it beside my plate, and rose from my chair. "Thank you for dinner," my father scoffed. "You're leaving?" "Yes." "And going where?" Brielle taunted. "Your car is barely holding together." I opened my coat, slid it on slowly. "I'll be fine." Avery stood too. "I'll walk you out." We stepped into the cold night, breath turning into misty clouds. The driveway glittered with frost beneath the moonlight. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "You don't deserve them," she finally whispered. "I know." "You're not coming back, are you?" "No," I said softly. "Not after tonight." She nodded and pulled me into a tight embrace. "Good, because someday they're going to realize what they lost." I smiled, the first genuine smile of the evening. "Someday," I echoed. When I reached my car, I looked back at the glowing windows of the house where I'd grown up, a house full of people who still believed I was small, helpless, lost. But they had no idea who I had become. I started the engine, backed out of the driveway, and whispered into the darkness, "You told me to live in the streets. You had no idea I owned half of them." As I drove away, Christmas lights blurred in the rearview mirror, fading into the night behind me, along with the last remnants of the daughter they thought I was. And ahead of me, beyond the highway and the cold December shadows, waited the truth of who I really was. The truth they were about to learn very, very soon. I drove through the dark stretch of highway, with the heater humming low and steady, the road unspooling beneath my tires like a ribbon leading me away from a life I had already outgrown. Pine trees blurred past in tall shadowed rows. The sky above was starless, washed out by a thin veil of winter cloud. My phone buzzed twice, Brielle's number, but I didn't look at it. I let it fade into the quiet. The night had already taken enough from me. Somewhere past Maple Bridge, I reached for the volume knob and turned off the music altogether. Silence felt cleaner. My thoughts were loud enough on their own. It never ceased to amaze me how quickly a family could turn a holiday into a battleground. I had been home for less than 2 hours before the first barb hit, before the first sigh of disappointment, before the first reminder that I was their designated failure. Their contrast piece, the person they used to highlight everything right about Brielle. And the horrible thing was, I used to believe them. I used to think something was wrong with me, that I was missing a piece everyone else had, that I was the reason the air felt tense between us, that if I worked harder or spoke softer or achieved something they recognized, maybe they would look at me the way they looked at her. But tonight cut through the last of that illusion. Their voices still echoed in my head, accusatory, bored, dismissive, and underneath the sting lay something deeper. Recognition, finality, truth. They didn't know me. They didn't want to know me. And the version they had created, the needy one, the lost one, the irresponsible one, was easier for them to hold on to than the real woman sitting at their table. By the time I crossed into the city limits, my shoulders had loosened. My breath wasn't trapped in my ribs anymore. The headlights caught on familiar landmarks, an old bakery, a gas station, the massive cedar tree that marked the turn toward my building. And the tension drained from me one strand at a time. When I finally pulled into the garage of my high-rise, the sensors blinked green and the steel door lifted smoothly. The air inside was warmer, quieter, scented faintly with concrete and the lemon polish used by the maintenance crews. I parked in my reserved space, one of 6 I leased for the fleet of vehicles I rotated for personal and corporate use. If my parents ever knew I had more cars than they had functional appliances, they would spontaneously combust. When I stepped out, my heels clicked softly against the pavement. The elevator chimed. The moment the doors closed around me, enclosing me in warm, brushed metal, something in my chest loosened completely. Home, not their home, mine. My penthouse sat on the 20th floor, overlooking the icy sweep of Clearwater Bay. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a private office, a kitchen lined in matte black quartz, a fireplace that clicked on at a voice command, a closet worth more than my sister's car. I swiped the entry panel and stepped inside. The silence was perfect. Not empty, not lonely, just mine. I dropped my keys into the ceramic bowl near the door, shrugged off my coat, and walked straight to the windows. The city glittered below like scattered silver, the water beyond dark and reflective. I pressed my palm to the glass, letting the cold seep through, grounding me. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from my CFO, Lionel. Everything processed. Q4 numbers confirmed. Dividend release scheduled. I exhaled softly. Good. At least something today carried clarity. Q4 of my flagship company alone had brought in more revenue than my parents could fathom. They still believed I freelanced for inconsistent scraps on the internet. Meanwhile, I had spent the last decade building an empire piece by piece. Automation labs, consulting divisions, data analytics, SaaS development, strategic partnerships, 6 subsidiaries, 2 satellite offices, and 1 global imprint they still didn't know existed. Because they never asked. Because they assumed. Because they needed me small so they could feel tall. I walked to the kitchen, made myself tea, and sat at the island. The steam curled upward, warming my face, but the warmth did nothing to soften the memory of Brielle's voice echoing across the Christmas table. Go live in the streets. She said it like she was tossing away lint, like she didn't see me at all, like she never had. For a moment I let myself remember the beginning, years ago when I still believed a different outcome was possible. I remembered being 15, sitting at the same Christmas table, proudly showing my parents the first website I ever coded from scratch. They glanced for maybe 3 seconds before dismissing it as a hobby. I remembered being 17, earning my first $1,000 from a local business who hired me to build an online store. My mother's reaction? Don't brag, it's tacky. I remembered being 19, telling them I planned to launch my first platform. My father had laughed, out loud. My sister had smirked, swirling hot chocolate in her cup. Why don't you do something normal? She'd said. Normal. Tonight's conversations were not new. They were echoes, repetitions. The same performance my family staged every year, reminding me I didn't belong, that I was less, that I needed rescuing by people who never offered real help. People who only liked the idea of being saviors. I set my tea down, rubbing my thumb against the rim. They had no idea I had stopped needing them long ago. My phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Avery. You okay? I typed back. Yes, on my way home. A moment later, I'm proud of you for walking out. My throat tightened unexpectedly. It was such a simple sentence, such a clean truth, and something about it sliced through the residue of tonight's hurt. Thank you, I wrote. Whenever you're ready to talk, I'm here, she replied. I closed my phone. For a long moment, I simply stared at the skyline, letting the lights blur. Avery's support was a thread that held me steady, one of the few members of my biological family who didn't treat me like a problem to be managed or a disappointment to be pitied. My tea cooled. After a few minutes, I stood and crossed to my office. The door slid open with a soft mechanical sound, and the glow from the equipment greeted me. The multi-monitor setup, the server cabinet humming softly, the stacked trays of documents, prototypes, and outgoing contracts. My sanctuary, my battlefield, my creation. I sat at my desk and flipped open a leather notebook, the one I always used after difficult days. Inside were handwritten notes, reminders, goals, reflections, strategies. I turned to a fresh page. At the top, I wrote, Christmas the last time. Under it, emotion truth, family ownership, silence weakness. And finally, they don't know me, but they will. I leaned back in my chair, letting the words settle on the page. I wasn't writing a threat. I wasn't writing revenge. I was writing acknowledgement. I was writing the beginning of something inevitable. Because the truth always comes out, whether you speak it or whether life forces it into the open. I had spent 10 years hiding my success to keep the peace. But peace built on lies wasn't peace at all. It was confinement. Tonight's final blow, Brielle's shout, my parents' silence, had snapped the last thread tying me to their version of me. From here on, I would stop shrinking so they could stay comfortable. From here on, I would expand. Not for them, not against them, but for myself. I closed the notebook and stepped back into the living room. The windows reflected my silhouette, strong and clear against the city lights. My parents thought I was drifting. My sister thought I was lost. They believed I had no real direction, no real purpose. Yet here I was, with more direction than I had ever had. Here I was, standing inside a home I paid for in full. Here I was, steering companies that shaped industries. Here I was, charting a future they could not comprehend. And they, sitting at their table, satisfied with their cruelty, had no idea. I turned off the lights, letting the glow of the city cast its luminous blue across the room. Then I walked to the bedroom, slid beneath the covers, and listened to the faint hum of the city drifting upward. I didn't fall asleep immediately. My mind replayed the dinner, the insults, the silence, the sharp sting of Brielle's voice. But beneath the replay was something else, an undercurrent of resolve, a current strong enough to pull me into a different future. Tonight had not been a breaking point. It had been a turning point. And as I closed my eyes, letting exhaustion finally pull me under, I whispered into the darkness. They wanted to see me small. They are about to see me clearly. And the truth would not be gentle. Under the soft glow of my kitchen lights, the first week after Christmas felt strangely hollow, as if someone had turned down the volume on the world and left only the echo of my family's voices behind. I woke each morning with the same dull ache in my chest, the memory of my sister's words replaying with the clarity of a knife scraping against glass. Go live in the streets. It didn't sting the way they meant it to. It wasn't shame. It was something colder, older, buried deep. An echo of every holiday, every dinner table, every sideways glance they'd ever used to remind me I wasn't the daughter they wanted. I kept myself busy because silence was dangerous. Silence is where old wounds breathe. So I dove into work with a discipline that bordered on obsession. My company had launched a new automation suite 2 weeks earlier, and the global teams needed coordination. At 5 a.m, while the rest of Denver still slept, I was already on a call with Berlin. At 7, I reviewed proposals from 2 retail conglomerates courting our AI workflow system. By 9, I sat in my home office overlooking the snow-lined street, sorting through data reports and sipping coffee that had gone cold too fast. But even in the rhythm of meetings and metrics, I felt the bruise of Christmas lingering. It wasn't visible, but I could feel it, faint, pulsing, reminding me what it meant to be the invisible daughter in a family that worshipped a golden child and its own spotless facade. On Wednesday, during a brief lull between calls, my phone buzzed with a message from Lily, my cousin, and the only person in my family tree with a soul that hadn't calcified. Saw your sister's post. Are you okay? I didn't bother asking which one. Brielle had a pattern. Crisis. Aesthetic. Martyrdom. It was probably something curated, filtered, arranged to make her life look perfect and mine look, well, whatever she needed it to look like to keep her pedestal intact. I typed back quickly. I'm fine, just busy, she replied almost instantly. They're telling people you stormed out because you were ashamed. Thought you should know. I stared at the message for a long moment, feeling that old familiar tension settle at the base of my spine. They weren't just rewriting what happened. They were doing what they always did, painting themselves as the victims, crafting a narrative where their cruelty was compassion and my boundaries were betrayal. I set the phone down and leaned back in my chair. The silence of my penthouse felt colder than usual. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed Christmas dinner like a looped video, each frame sharper than the last. My mother's raised eyebrows. My father's disappointment disguised as authority. Brielle's triumphant smirk, polished like a gemstone meant to catch the light. They had pushed me out because it was easy, because it protected the image they valued more than their own daughter, and because they thought I would never push back. By the second week, a strange numbness settled in. I moved through my routines like a ghost in my own life. my accomplishments suddenly muted against the noise of old childhood wounds resurfacing. I didn't cry. I didn't break down. I simply functioned, efficiently, quietly, methodically. But in the quiet moments, when the day dimmed, when the last meeting ended, when my home fell still, that numbness cracked. What hurt wasn't the insult. It was the pattern, the predictability, the reminder that they had never truly seen me. On Thursday at noon, I grabbed a quick lunch and scrolled absent-mindedly through social media while waiting for my soup to heat. That's when I saw Brielle's story. A perfectly framed photo of her standing beside our mother in the Vance Lodge, the chandelier glowing behind them. They were smiling as if the world had never held a sharp edge. The caption read, "Grateful for family, grateful for truth." Some people run from responsibility, but we rise. There was a heart emoji. There was a tag for the lodge's account. There was not a single mention of me. My chest tightened, not with jealousy, not with hurt, but with recognition. They weren't just erasing me from the holiday, they were erasing me from the narrative, turning me into a shadow so Brielle's light could shine brighter. I put down my phone. Then, as if on cue, it buzzed again. A text from Lily. "Please tell me you didn't see the story." I swallowed a breath. I saw it. There was a long pause, then, "They're telling everyone you refused to help with the lodge, that you ran off to live your influencer life. They're using you as the reason for their financial problems." My jaw tightened. The lodge had been struggling long before Christmas. Years of mismanagement, overspending, a refusal to adapt to a changing market. But instead of acknowledging any of that, they pinned the blame on me, the daughter who had built multi-million-dollar systems without a dime of their help. The irony was almost comical. That night, I sat on my couch wrapped in a blanket, watching snow dust the balcony rail. The city lights reflected faintly off the glass, shimmering like tiny silent witnesses to the unraveling I was trying so hard to ignore. I didn't want to admit it, but the stories, the whispers, the lies, they were starting to grate. I had walked away to protect myself, but my silence was giving them room to rewrite history in real time. A part of me wondered if I should call them, confront them, demand an explanation. But the larger part, the part that remembered every holiday where I had been dismissed, every achievement ignored, every snide comment disguised as concern, knew it was pointless. People who thrive on a false narrative cannot survive the truth. On the morning of the second Saturday, I opened my eyes before the alarm, feeling that odd heaviness again. I dragged myself out of bed, made coffee, and stood before the tall windows that overlooked the snowy street below. I had everything I had ever dreamed of. A thriving company, financial freedom, a home that felt like a sanctuary. And yet, the weight of family rejection lingered like a bruise. My phone buzzed on the counter. A message from one of my engineers. Then a Slack notification. Then another email. Life was moving. Work was moving. The world was moving. And I realized I was the only one frozen. Around lunchtime, a new notification popped up. Lily again. "You should see what Brielle posted." A sharp pulse of irritation shot through me. I opened Instagram, bracing myself. This time it wasn't a story. It was a full post, a carousel of photos titled, "When your sister refuses to grow up, the whole family pays for it." There were pictures of the lodge covered in snow, a shot of our parents sitting at the lobby desk looking tired. The caption painted herself as the dutiful daughter picking up the pieces while her irresponsible sister chased fame. I exhaled slowly, a long cold breath that fogged the air before disappearing. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not in anger, not in pain. In clarity. Crystal. Cutting, undeniable clarity. They were not simply misunderstanding me. They were using me. They had always used me. My silence, my compliance, my absence. They needed me to fail so Brielle could shine. They needed a scapegoat to shield their pride. And now they were weaponizing their version of Christmas night to polish their own image. I picked up my phone and typed, "Thanks for letting me know. I'm handling it." But the truth was, I wasn't handling anything. Not yet. That evening, around 6, I put on my coat and stepped outside into the snowy air. The cold bit at my cheeks, but it felt grounding, clarifying. I walked several blocks, letting the rhythm of my boots on the sidewalk steady my breath. For the first time in 2 weeks, I wasn't replaying Christmas in my head. I was dissecting it, examining it, understanding it. And then, as I stood at a crosswalk beneath a street lamp humming softly in the cold, a realization washed over me, sharp as lightning. This wasn't the first time they'd rewritten my story. This was a lifetime of practice. Every time Brielle succeeded, they amplified it into legend. Every time I succeeded, they shrank it into trivia. When I struggled, they pitied me. When I soared, they redirected the spotlight. When I left home, they called it rebellion. When Brielle left home, they called it blossoming. It wasn't personal, it was structural. A family dynamic built on hierarchy, favoritism, and a golden child who could do no wrong. I reached the next corner and paused, watching snowflakes drift beneath the streetlight. I had built an empire without their help. I had supported hundreds of employees, led global teams, donated to causes they didn't even know existed. I made $75 million a year, for God's sake. And still, they preferred the fiction where I was the irresponsible one who needed to be set straight. A wave of exhaustion washed through me. And then something else. Resolve. When I returned home, I stood in my dark living room, staring at the skyline beyond the windows. A new thought emerged, quiet, steady, unshakable. If they would lie about me this easily, what else had they lied about? What else were they hiding beneath the polished image of a perfect family and a perfect lodge? I didn't have answers. But for the first time since Christmas, I wanted them. Not for revenge, for truth. Truth I should have searched for years ago. Truth I avoided because I thought distance was enough to protect me. I walked to my desk, opened my laptop, and stared at the screen. My cursor blinked like a heartbeat. Then I typed a message to Alexandra, my attorney. "Can we talk Monday morning? Something's off with my family. I think I need to look into it." I hit send. Then I whispered to the empty room, the sound barely more than breath. I'm done letting them write my story. And with that, week 2 began. Not with sorrow, not with fear, but with a quiet, rising determination I hadn't felt in years. The kind that comes when a woman finally decides she's tired of being erased. The email arrived just before sunrise on Tuesday, slipping into my inbox with the same quietness as the fresh layer of snow blanketing Denver. I was sitting at my kitchen counter stirring honey into my tea when the notification flashed. The subject line made my breath still in my chest. Urgent. Confirmation needed. Regarding your guarantee on Vance Lodge renovation loan. I blinked once, twice. The words didn't rearrange themselves. They didn't soften. They stayed exactly where they were. Sharp, impossible, wrong. Guarantee, loan, Vance Lodge. I hadn't guaranteed anything. I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't been involved with my family's finances since I was 22, and realized my parents viewed my bank account as emergency scaffolding for their poor decisions. I clicked the email. Dear Ms. Vance, we are writing to confirm your continued willingness to serve as guarantor for the Lodge renovation and expansion loan, originally filed July 14th, 2 years ago. My tea went cold in my hands. Guarantor. Expansion loan. 2 years ago. I scrolled further. The loan amount, just under $620,000. The signatures, 3 lines, Thomas Vance, Lorraine Vance, and me. Except the last one wasn't mine. My heart thudded, not quickly but heavily, like a slow mallet dropping inside my ribs. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a clerical error. Someone had used my name, my legal identity, my creditworthiness, on a massive loan without my consent. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly tight. I dialed the number listed at the bottom of the email. A paralegal answered cheerfully, unaware she was holding a string that could unravel everything. "This is Mara Vance," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I received an email about a renovation loan. There must be some confusion. I never signed anything." There was a pause, a few keyboard clicks. "Let me pull that up for you, Ms. Vance." Minutes stretched thin. My fingers curled into the counter. "Oh," she said finally, as if she'd found a missing button. "No, it's here. Your signature is on page 7. I can email you the full document." "Please do." When the PDF arrived seconds later, I opened it instantly. My eyes locked on the place where my name appeared. The loops, the slants, the shape of the M. It looked close enough that someone who didn't know my handwriting well might believe it. But it wasn't mine. I had never signed this. Someone had forged it. The heat rising in my chest wasn't panic. It was something thinner, sharper, betrayal stretching itself awake. I sent the file straight to my attorney, Alexandra, with a single sentence. "Call me the moment you see this." Then I grabbed my coat, needing air. Outside, the morning was painfully still, the sort of quiet where the cold settles over your skin like a second layer. I walked with no destination, just the brittle sound of my boots on ice, the steady rhythm of my breath, and the realization forming slowly but unmistakably. My family had crossed a line they could never step back from. At noon, Alexandra called. "This signature is forged," she said without preamble. "Sloppy forgery, too. Someone tried, but they weren't trained." My hand tightened around the phone. "What does this mean legally?" "It means they used your identity without consent on a 6-figure loan." She exhaled. "It's fraud, Mara. Real fraud." She listed the steps: filing a fraud affidavit, freezing related accounts, initiating a handwriting analysis, requesting security footage from the loan date. But her voice softened on one sentence. "You need to prepare yourself emotionally, too." Emotionally. A strange word for something that felt as cold as the wind stinging my cheeks. That afternoon, I forwarded the loan details to Grant, my CFO and a trusted friend. Within an hour, he had compiled a preliminary breakdown of where the money had gone. The first shock: the lodge wasn't the only thing funded. A large portion, nearly 100,000, had been funneled into emerging business development. Emerging business development. My mind snapped to one place instantly. Brielle's Aesthetic Center. I texted Lily. Did Brielle ever mention how she funded her business? The response came quickly. She said your parents believed in her vision and backed her. Why? My stomach twisted, not from surprise, but from a feeling that bordered dangerously close to inevitability. I typed, "Ask her if the initial funding came from family loans." Lily responded minutes later. She said yes. She said your parents secured it the responsible way. Why? Before I could answer, another message appeared, this time from an unknown number. It was my mother. "Honey, I heard the bank reached out. Don't overreact. It's just paperwork. Just paperwork." My jaw clenched. Then the next message landed. "You make good money anyway. You'll be fine. This was for the family." A slow exhale left my lungs, frosty, controlled. Another bubble. Brielle is our future. Supporting her is supporting all of us. There it was. No apology, no explanation, no remorse, just entitlement. Pure, unfiltered entitlement. I stared at the message until the edges of my vision blurred, until the words sank deep enough to hit something inside me that had been sleeping for years. Not anger, not shock, clarity. That night, I didn't bother with dinner. I sat at my dining table with only my laptop's glow reflecting off the glass. I opened a blank document and typed one word: plan. Not revenge, not punishment, not anything emotional. Emotion clouded judgment. I needed precision. I needed logic. I needed truth. The first step, Alexandra had said, was legal protection. The second, Grant added, was forensic accounting. The third was harder, facing the reality that my family saw me not as a person, but as a resource, something to tap when convenient, discard when not. I didn't sleep much. When I did drift off, it was the kind of restless unconsciousness where nothing felt real, except the certainty forming in the center of my chest. By morning, Grant had sent his full analysis. The lodge's books were worse than I imagined. Income declining, debt snowballing, contractor payments overdue, maintenance neglected. If the loan defaulted, and it was on track to, the bank could seize everything tied to it, including the property, including their remaining assets, including my forged guarantee. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came in a single highlighted line. Brielle Aesthetic Center is operating at a net loss of 68%, nearly 70% loss, propped up almost entirely by the renovation loan funds and a secondary private loan my parents had taken. I leaned back, closing my eyes. They hadn't just used my name. They'd used me to feed a sinking dream. The next morning, Alexandra confirmed the forensic team would handle the documentation. She asked whether I intended to pursue charges. I didn't answer. I wasn't ready. Not yet. That afternoon, as I walked to my car, snowflakes fell in slow spirals, catching on my scarf. The cold seeped into my skin, but inside something else warmed, a rising certainty, steady and firm. They had lied, they had stolen, they had twisted the story, but this time they had touched something untouchable. My autonomy, my identity, my name. And while my family believed I was weak because I rarely fought back, they never understood this about me. Quiet doesn't mean powerless. When I stepped into my penthouse that evening, the city stretched below me in its winter glow. Lights reflected across the glass, tiny pulses of life moving through the streets. I stood at the window, my reflection staring back, steady, calm, resolute. If my family was willing to forge my signature once, they would do it again. If they were willing to sacrifice me for Brielle, they would do it again. If they were willing to lie about me to save face, they would do it again. But there was one thing they would not do again. Use me. I turned off the lights, letting the city's glow fill the room, and whispered into the quiet, "They already burned the bridge. All I'm doing now is making sure I never rebuild it." And with that, the plan, cold, meticulous, necessary, moved from a line on my screen to a fire in my chest. The morning after the forensic results came in, I woke with a feeling I couldn't name at first. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't grief. It wasn't even shock. It was something steadier, colder, more precise, like the click of a lock sliding into place after years of jamming. The sun had barely risen, but I was already sitting at my dining table with my laptop open, the city still quiet beneath a heavy layer of snow. The world outside felt new. My reality, however, had never been clearer. I spent the first hours of the day in complete silence, scrolling through spreadsheets, piecing together every thread that had unraveled from the forged signature. Every document, every transfer, every expense my family had hidden came into sharp focus. The more I looked, the more undeniable the truth became. Nothing about this was accidental. They had planned the loan. They had assumed my silence. They had built their financial survival around the belief that I would never fight back. At 9, I met with Alexandra and Grant in my office downstairs. I'd rented the space on the first floor of my building, a private, minimalist room with white walls and a walnut desk, designed for moments when my penthouse felt too personal for work like this. Alexandra arrived first, her coat dusted with snow, her expression already tightened into the kind of focus reserved for high-stakes cases. She sat, opened her folder, and began reviewing the timeline. "We file the affidavit today," she said. "The bank will freeze the loan until the investigation is complete. They'll request handwriting samples from the co-signers." I nodded. "They won't match." "They absolutely won't," she replied. "And once that's confirmed, the loan goes into dispute. Your liability is removed. Their liability becomes substantial." That was putting it gently. A few minutes later, Grant stepped in, carrying his tablet loaded with financial projections. He sat across from me and turned the screen toward the table. "Here's where things stand," he began. "If the loan defaults, which it will, they risk losing the lodge entirely. Their business accounts are already underwater. The property is leveraged beyond reason." I didn't flinch. I didn't wince. I didn't look away. Grant tapped another tab. "And Brielle's Aesthetic Center? The losses have doubled in the past 4 months. Payroll has been late twice. If the loan money hadn't been funneled into her business, she would have closed last year." My breath came slow, steady. "They used me to keep her dream alive," I said. Grant nodded. "Yes. And now the bank will see that misuse. It's going to get messy for them." Alexandra added gently, "You need to decide what your end goal is, Mara. Do you want prosecution, compensation, distance, all of the above?" I rested my hands on the table, fingers laced together. The metal of my ring felt cool against my skin, grounding me. "I want the truth documented," I said. "I want legal separation. I want my identity protected. Beyond that..." I let the sentence settle, unfinished. I wasn't ready to speak the rest aloud yet. We continued reviewing documents until the morning slipped into afternoon, the three of us sitting beneath the soft hum of the overhead light. By the time they left, my plan was fully in motion, formal, structured, irreversible. But planning is one thing, the aftermath is another. That evening, I sat on my balcony wrapped in a thick coat, watching cars move slowly along the icy street below. It was the kind of quiet where you could hear your own heartbeat. I pulled my knees up, rested my chin on them, and finally allowed myself to feel the weight of everything. My family had forged my name. They had lied to their community. They had funneled stolen resources into the one daughter they valued. And they had expected me to carry it all with a bowed head. The bruise inside my chest throbbed, not because of the betrayal, I'd grown used to betrayal, but because of the clarity. I had spent years building a world where their approval didn't matter, but I hadn't built a world where their actions couldn't touch me. I had created distance. I had created boundaries, but I had never created armor. Now I needed armor. The next day, the cracks in their world began to show. At 10 in the morning, Lily called. "Mara, things are blowing up over here." I straightened. "What happened?" She took a shaky breath. "People are talking. The lodge just canceled 2 winter events. They're telling everyone it's unexpected maintenance, but that's not what the staff is saying." The pulse in my throat quickened. "What are they saying?" "That the renovation loan is in trouble," she whispered, as if someone might hear. "That there's a freeze on the funds." I closed my eyes. Of course. The affidavit would have triggered immediate restrictions. "And," she continued, "your parents are panicking." I didn't say anything. "They're telling people you sabotaged them," she added softly, "that you cut them off financially, that you're refusing to help family." My eyes opened slowly. Snow fell in thick flakes beyond my windows, as if the world was trying to bury the truth beneath something soft. "I haven't given them a dime in over a decade," I said. "I know," she replied, "but they're rewriting everything." Of course they were. A crumbling facade always needs a villain. "Thanks for telling me," I murmured. "Be careful, Mara," she said gently. "They're desperate." Desperation was something I understood all too well. Desperation makes people dangerous. Desperation makes people cruel. Desperation makes people forge signatures. After the call, I sat very still, letting the weight of her words sink into the quiet. My parents weren't just lying. They weren't just spinning stories. They were setting the stage, shifting blame, positioning themselves as the wounded heroes of their own narrative. And in that moment, I realized something chilling. They didn't think they had done anything wrong. To them, my silence meant consent. My absence meant permission. My success meant responsibility. Responsibility to fix what they had broken. Responsibility to catch the weight they dropped. Responsibility to bleed so their world wouldn't bruise. I stood slowly and walked to my office, pulling out the file Alexandra had put together. The documents inside were evidence, but they were also something else. Reflection. A mirror held up to my childhood. The forged signature felt no different than every time they took credit for my achievements. The loan felt no different than every time they told people I was unstable. The funneling felt no different than every time Brielle's failures became my fault. This wasn't new. This was their pattern, just magnified. That night, when I tried to fall asleep, my mind replayed everything. My father's pointed finger, my mother's raised voice, Brielle's smug smile as she threw me out of the family narrative one more time. But beneath all that, deeper than the memories, was a quiet truth, rising like a tide. The girl they dismissed was gone. The woman they underestimated was awake. The storm they started was coming for them, not by my anger, not by revenge, but by the consequences of their own hands. And for the first time since Christmas, I didn't feel hollow. I felt ready, ready for whatever came next, ready to walk into the truth without flinching, ready to stop being the daughter who swallowed pain to keep peace that never existed. My world was steady now, focused, sharp. And theirs? Theirs was about to shake. By the time the second week bled into the third, the numbness I'd been carrying had hardened into something sharper, a clarity that felt almost surgical. It didn't shake, it didn't tremble, it didn't waver. It simply existed, steady and undeniable, like a truth I had always known but never allowed myself to acknowledge. And that truth was simple. My family wasn't done hurting me, not even close. The first sign came on a quiet Monday morning. I was in my office reviewing contracts when my phone buzzed with a message from Lily. "Hey, are you okay? I heard something weird today about you." I frowned, setting the contract aside. "Define weird," I typed back. The typing bubble appeared, disappeared, reappeared. Finally, her response came through. "Your mom told the ladies at church you're couch surfing in Seattle because your little online project failed." I stared at the message so long the words blurred. Couch surfing, failed project, not just a lie. A narrative, a performance. I typed slowly, "I have a 4-bedroom townhouse. No couches involved." Lily sent a single reply, "I'm so sorry. They're making you sound helpless. And honestly, pitiful, pitiful." The word sat bitter on my tongue. There was nothing accidental about this. My parents weren't just embarrassed by me. They were invested in the version of me that made them virtuous. They needed the world to believe they were the suffering, patient parents of a difficult daughter. They needed sympathy, validation, a reason for their own failures that didn't implicate them. I thanked Lily and put my phone down, but my hands wouldn't stay still. They kept tapping the desk, restless, searching for an explanation that wasn't ugly, one that didn't confirm what I already suspected. But the explanation was ugly, and it was simple. They needed me to fail to justify everything they'd done. 2 days later, On Wednesday, more proof arrived. Lily again. You need to see this. She sent a photo, taken discreetly from the back of a church meeting room. It showed my mother standing before a circle of women, her hands clasped dramatically against her chest. Her face was arranged into that practiced grief she only used when she wanted attention. Under it, Lily wrote, "She's saying she had to let you fall, that you refused their help and lost your direction in life." A laugh escaped my throat, not because it was funny, but because some absurd part of me had hoped my mother would stop at mild slander. But of course she wouldn't. She needed the center of attention the way some people need oxygen. I zoomed in on the photo. The women around her looked sympathetic, concerned, comforting. They were comforting her for the struggles of a daughter who didn't exist. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor, trying to understand why this hit harder than usual. They had dismissed me my whole life. They'd rewritten my story for years. So why did this feel different? Because they weren't just lying about me. They were using me, wielding me like a shield against judgment and accountability. A daughter turned scapegoat. I didn't sleep that night. My mind twisted through memories. My mother's disappointed sighs, my father's lectures disguised as concern, Brielle's smirks that always seemed to say you'll never measure up. I hadn't been part of a family. I'd been part of a system. A system designed to keep Brielle shining and me apologizing. By Thursday morning, the emotional fog had settled into something else. Resolve. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself coffee, and tipped my head back as the steam hit my face. The warmth did nothing for the cold in my chest. Just as I lifted my mug, my phone buzzed again. This time from someone I never expected, a former classmate of Brielle's. Saw her at brunch with Lexi. They were talking about you, just thought you should know. My stomach tightened. There was a screenshot attached, a snippet of a comment thread from Instagram. User: What happened with your sister? Brielle: Some people don't understand responsibility. Another user: Didn't she do some MLM stuff? Brielle: Exactly, MLM, not tech, not automation, not software systems used by corporations. MLM, a deliberate insult, a deliberate erasure. I closed my eyes for a long moment. When I opened them again, the world had sharpened into a single point. They weren't content with rewriting the Christmas story. They were rewriting me. And suddenly, I understood the danger. When people tell a lie often enough, eventually someone believes it. Eventually, the lie becomes truth in the eyes of anyone who isn't paying attention, and my family was counting on that. But they had forgotten something. I wasn't 16 anymore, sitting at a dinner table begging for recognition. I wasn't a college dropout afraid of disappointing them. I wasn't the girl who swallowed my voice to keep peace that never existed. I was a woman with a global company, legal resources, influence, and something far more powerful than money: clarity. That afternoon, I opened my laptop and reviewed the plan I'd created days earlier, the plan that now felt less like preparation and more like necessity. Every step was designed to separate my life from theirs, to protect my name, to protect my future. But now another step emerged. A step I hadn't anticipated. Truth. Not revenge. Truth. I needed the truth documented, exposed, illuminated. Because if they were rewriting my story, I needed to write it back, clean, sharp, irrefutable. Later that night, as I sat curled on my couch with a blanket wrapped around my legs, the city lights blinking softly through the windows, something unexpected happened. I found myself whispering aloud. They'll never stop unless I stop them. The room didn't echo. It absorbed the words like it had been waiting to hear them. I leaned my head back and let the quiet settle into my bones. They erased me. They rewrote me. They used me. But they had underestimated me. They had forgotten that the daughter they dismissed built her entire world without them, and built it stronger, smarter, and far more resilient than they ever imagined. By Friday morning, the numbness was gone. The fog had cleared. There was no sadness left, only a sharp, steady purpose. I showered, dressed, tied my hair back, and stood before the mirror. The woman looking back wasn't soft anymore. She wasn't confused. She wasn't lost. She was focused, determined, whole. I grabbed my phone and texted Alexandra, "Let's move forward with everything. No delays." Then I added one more line. "They're rewriting the story. I'm done letting them hold the pen." Before I could put the phone down, it buzzed again. This time, a voicemail from my father. I didn't listen to it. Not yet. Instead, I walked to the window, watched snow drift lazily past the glass, and felt something rise in my chest, a quiet but fierce certainty. They had set the fire, but I would walk out of it unburned. And by the time they realized what they had ignited, it would already be too late. The third week arrived with the kind of cold that crept quietly into the bones of the city, wrapping itself around rooftops and street lamps until everything looked frozen in a moment just before dawn. But inside my penthouse, something else was thawing. A resolve I hadn't felt in years, a sharpness that seemed to hum beneath my skin. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't replaying Christmas dinner on a loop. I had moved into a different phase entirely, a phase with purpose. Monday morning began with a call from Alexandra, her voice crisp and steady as she outlined the next steps of our legal action. The fraud affidavit was accepted. The handwriting analysis was underway. The bank had already flagged the loan as disputed, triggering a freeze on further transactions. Everything was moving exactly as it needed to. But she wasn't the only one with news. At 11 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a message from Grant. "Check your email." Something came up. I opened my laptop and found a folder he'd titled Preliminary Forensics, Family Holdings. I clicked. Then I froze. The first document was a full reconstruction of the Vance Lodge's financial trajectory over the past 5 years. Graph after graph showed a steady decline, a cliff drop in the last 2 years, and a red highlighted section indicating insolvency risk. They were worse off than I'd imagined. Much worse. But the second document was the one that made my stomach tighten. It listed every account, every loan, every credit application associated with my parents, and the ones linked to Brielle. And next to 2 of them was a line that made my pulse skip. Cosigner, Monsieur Vance. I felt something cold slip down my spine. 2 forged signatures. Not 1, 2. I read the details carefully. One was the renovation loan. The second was a smaller private loan tied not to the lodge, but to Brielle's business. A soft exhale left my lips, almost a laugh. Of course. Of course it wasn't just one. People don't break boundaries politely. Once they cross a line, it becomes a door. I closed the laptop. That evening, when the sun dipped behind the Denver skyline and the city lights blinked awake one by one, I sat on my balcony wrapped in a thick sweater. My mind wasn't racing. It was organizing, placing every revelation into a clean, sharp structure. My family hadn't accidentally hurt me. They had systematically used me. They had forged my name twice. They had used my identity as financial scaffolding. They had built Brielle's entire image on my credit. They had taken my silence as permission. And they had assumed, truly assumed, that I would never look closely enough to notice. A soft vibration pulled me back from my thoughts. My phone, a text from Lily. "It's getting worse over here." I picked it up immediately. "What happened?" she responded almost instantly. "Your mom was crying in front of Mrs. Donovan at the market, saying you've abandoned them in their time of need." I stared at the message, my lips parting slightly. Abandoned. The woman who told her daughter to go live in the streets was now crying about being abandoned. Lily added another message. Your dad is saying you're refusing to help the lodge even though you promised before you left for college. Did you ever promise anything? My throat tightened. I hadn't promised a thing. I had been 19 and barely surviving emotionally. But my parents had always had a talent for retroactive storytelling. Change the past and the present becomes easier to justify. Then, another message. And Brielle. She's telling her friends you're jealous, that your business never took off, that you're embarrassed to come home. A quiet laugh escaped me. It wasn't amusement. It was disbelief wrapped in resignation. For years I'd underestimated the depth of their denial. Now I saw exactly how deep it ran. Thanks for telling me, I typed back. But Lily didn't stop. Mara, they're not just gossiping, they're building a narrative where you're the villain. Like they're preparing for something. Preparing. The word made my heartbeat slow. I typed, keep an eye on things. And thank you. I put my phone down and leaned back in my chair, eyes fixed on the glittering skyline. Something strange happened then, a clarity, sudden and clean. Their lies weren't random. They were foundation. Foundation for the moment when everything they were hiding would collapse. People don't lie in small doses before a storm. They lie loudly because they know the wind is about to expose everything. The next day, Grant and I met in my office again. He came in carrying a printed dossier and a look that said he'd been doing math no one should have to do. You need to see this, he said, sliding the papers toward me. I skimmed the first few pages, then stopped. A projected timeline of the lodge's remaining viability, 3 months left before default. Maximum. Maybe 4 if they postponed payroll. 2 if there was another inspection or emergency repair. And the worst part? My forged guarantee had been the only reason the bank approved their refinancing 2 years ago. Without it, the lodge would have shuttered already. Grant leaned back in his chair. They needed you to survive, and they counted on you not knowing. I nodded slowly. They've always counted on that. That's not the only thing, he added. Look at page 7. I flipped. It was a list of inquiries on my credit history, 3 of them coming from small banks in Cedar Ridge, all within the past 4 months. I hadn't applied for anything. They tried again? My voice was steady, calm, too calm. Yes. Grant's tone darkened. Someone tried to open another line of credit under your name. The bank flagged it because the address didn't match your records. Identity theft. Ongoing. My breath left my lungs in a slow, deliberate exhale. They were going to keep doing it, I whispered. Yes, he said simply, until something stopped them. I closed the folder gently. In that moment, any lingering softness inside me evaporated. Any doubt, any hesitation. They weren't confused. They weren't misguided. They were willing to keep using me until there was nothing left to take. That afternoon, as I walked through my neighborhood, the world felt sharper. The crunch of snow under my boots, the bite of cold air on my cheeks. I watched people hurry into cafes, arms loaded with shopping bags, holiday lights glowing warmly in frosted windows. Life moved. People moved. And for the first time, I moved with them, no longer paralyzed by old wounds. I checked my phone. A new message. Not from Lily, from an unknown number. My mother. Mara. Please call us. Things are getting hard. We're worried. We need your help. I smiled. Not unkindly, but knowingly. There it was. The shift. Not long ago, they'd told the world I was lost, irresponsible, unstable. Now that consequences had arrived, they needed the daughter they'd thrown away. I typed nothing. Not yet. Instead, I kept walking until I reached the small park near my building. Children were building a snowman, their mittens clumsy but determined. A woman walked her dog along the path, humming softly to herself. An older couple held hands, leaning into each other against the cold. Normal life. Healthy life. Life built on something real. I sat on a bench, watching my breath fog in the cold air, and then I whispered to myself, almost softly, "They're not going to rewrite this chapter. Not this time." The wind carried the words away, but the meaning settled deeply inside me, anchoring itself in a place that had once been fragile. By the time I walked home, the decision was fully formed, undeniable. I would protect myself. I would expose the truth. I would no longer let my silence become their weapon. Week 3 didn't break me. It clarified me. And in that clarity, something powerful awoke. Something I hadn't felt in years. Not revenge, not fury, freedom. The kind that comes when a woman finally understands she owes nothing to the people who built their comfort on her disappearance. The storm hadn't arrived yet, but I could hear it in the distance. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid. The night the investigators' full report arrived, Seattle felt impossibly still. I had returned from a long day of meetings, kicked off my heels by the door, and stood for a moment in the dark entryway, listening to the hum of the heating system and the faint echo of my own breath. Outside the windows, the city lights shimmered across the water like scattered stars. Inside, a storm I had been ignoring for weeks gathered quietly in my chest. The email came at 8:42 p.m. Subject: Comprehensive findings. Vance Family Financials. My pulse slowed, not quickened, because some part of me already knew whatever was inside that file wasn't going to surprise me. It was only going to confirm what my instincts had been screaming since Christmas night. The lie was bigger than the insult. The insult was only the surface. I opened the attached folder. The first file was a summary, a clean clinical distillation of my family's financial state, insolvency projections, underreported expenses, creditor warnings. The lodge's books were bleeding in red ink. My sister's business was collapsing quietly behind polished Instagram filters, and my parents' personal accounts were nearly drained from months of shuffling money around to maintain their facade. I scrolled. The next file made me sit up straighter. It was a timeline of every action tied to the renovation loan, every transfer, every reuse of funds, every questionable invoice. And there, highlighted in yellow, was the line that cut straight through me. Unauthorized cosigner. M. Vance signature determined fraudulent. Estimated forgery date, July 17th, 2 years prior. I stared at the page, feeling neither shock nor anger, only a cold, precise acknowledgement. This wasn't sloppy desperation. This wasn't a single misstep. This was calculated. But the third file, the discretionary allocation breakdown, that was the one that pressed the air from my lungs. $90,000. Unaccounted for in the lodge's renovation expenses. The transfer trail ended at Brielle Aesthetics Center. They had used part of the loan to build her dream. Not mine. Never mine. Grant had already added notes in the margin. Funds misallocated. Potential grounds for bank action. Possible criminal liability. My hands tightened around the laptop. A slow throb formed behind my sternum. Not pain. Power. A strange growing stillness that felt like the eye of a hurricane. Then came the final file. Additional Identity Risk Assessment. At the top, in bold. There is evidence suggesting the family intended to use M. Vance's identity in future credit applications. My breath stilled. Below were screenshots of failed credit pulls made in the past 3 months. The applications used my name and partial social security number. The only reason they hadn't gone through was because the address on file didn't match. They hadn't just used me. They had plans to keep using me. My phone buzzed suddenly. I glanced at the screen. A text from an unknown number. "When can we talk?" "Mom." I let the phone go dark. 10 minutes later, another buzz. Another text. We didn't mean to upset you. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. I felt something deep inside me shift, like a door closing, quietly but permanently. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened the sliding door to the balcony, letting the cold night air wash over me. The wind carried the scent of salt from the sound and the distant hum of traffic, grounding me in a world far larger than Cedar Ridge and its suffocating expectations. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my father. "Call us. It's urgent. No explanation, no apology, just the tone of a man used to being obeyed." I turned the phone over, screen down, and walked back inside. Later, wrapped in a blanket on the couch, I stared at the ceiling as the investigator's words echoed through my mind. Used your identity, misallocated funds, forged signature, intent to repeat. But there was also another truth, quieter but sharper. They truly believed I would never fight back. Years of being the quiet daughter, the difficult daughter, the one who didn't fit the family script. They had mistaken silence for weakness, distance for obedience, success for something they could reshape into a story that made them look better. At 10:15 p.m., my attorney emailed again. "Call me if you need to talk through next steps. Everything is in your hands now. Everything is in your hands now." The words sat warm in my chest. For the first time in my life, the story wasn't being twisted by their voices, their lies, their expectations. For the first time, the truth was fully visible, documented, undeniable, theirs. Eventually, exhaustion tugged at me. I went to bed, but sleep didn't come quickly. When it finally did, it felt thin, fragile. At dawn, I woke to another message, this time from Grant. "One more thing you should see." He sent a link to a private investor portal. I logged in, scrolling until a specific listing made me stop cold. Distressed asset package, high priority. Included properties, Vance Lodge, adjoining land, commercial lease, Brielle Aesthetic Center. My fingers hovered over the screen. The lodge, the land, her business, everything tied directly to the forged loan. I scrolled further. Status: projected acquisition within 60-90 days. Primary interested buyer, blank, pending. My pulse steadied. If the bank froze the loan, if my parents defaulted, if the property entered foreclosure, it would end up right here, on this list, ready to be acquired by a firm like the one I regularly partnered with. The realization settled slowly. I could become that buyer, not because I wanted revenge, not because I wanted to punish anyone, but because allowing the property to fall into anyone else's hands would mean losing the opportunity to reclaim something that had been used against me. Ownership wasn't vengeance. Ownership was protection. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Brielle. "We need to meet. Today. No explanation, no greeting, just urgency, the kind that comes from someone who can feel their world tilting beneath their feet." I didn't respond. Instead, I walked into my kitchen, brewed a fresh cup of coffee, and stood at the window watching the sun rise over the water. The light spilled slowly across the bay, turning everything gold. The boats, the rooftops, the glass facades of the downtown buildings. And in that light, one truth crystallized fully. They had set this fire themselves. I didn't need to throw gasoline. I didn't need to strike a match. I only needed to step out of the way. The consequences would burn on their own. But stepping out of the way didn't mean stepping back. It meant stepping forward, with intention, with clarity, with control. Later that morning, I called Alexandra. "I want to proceed," I said simply, "with everything." There was a pause. Then, "You're sure?" "Yes." "Okay," she replied, her tone sharpening. "Then let's build the wall between you and them, and when the fallout comes, you won't be touched by any of it." When the call ended, I felt a strange sense of lightness settle in my chest. Not relief, not triumph, but a quiet certainty. The truth was no longer blurry. The path was no longer unclear. And whatever came next, I was not the frightened daughter standing alone at the end of a Christmas table. I was a woman who finally understood the power of her own silence, and the even greater power of breaking it. Week 4 hadn't officially begun yet, but the ignition had. And the people who once believed they could rewrite my story were about to learn one thing. The pen was never in their hands to begin with. The 4th week didn't slip in quietly. It arrived with a kind of electric certainty, humming beneath my skin from the moment I woke up Monday morning. Seattle's winter light spilled weakly through the blinds, casting pale stripes across my bedroom floor. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel hollow when I opened my eyes. I felt focused, sharp, present. By 7, I was already dressed, sitting at the corner of my dining table with my laptop open, reviewing the final draft of the expansion plan I'd put on hold months earlier. Back then, I wasn't sure if the timing was right. Back then, I still held on to a small, foolish piece of hope that my family might someday treat me like the woman I'd worked so hard to become, rather than the child they insisted I still was. But that hope was gone now, burned down at Christmas dinner and buried beneath forged signatures, lies, and 3 decades of erasure. Now there was space. Space for ambition. Space for strategy. Space for me. The first order of business was the New York office. We'd secured a potential space in Midtown, a clean, glass-walled suite overlooking Bryant Park, perfect for our East Coast operations. I reviewed the contract one more time, fingers steady as I typed the authorization code that sealed the deal. The ink on my family's betrayal wasn't even dry, but the ink on this expansion absolutely was. Next came the Austin Innovation Hub proposal, an idea I had been refining for months. A studio specializing in AI-driven workflow systems for retail automation. The kind of project that would push my company into a completely new territory. A territory no one had believed I could reach back when I was 18, and teaching myself to code in a freezing apartment, eating microwaved vegetables at 2 a.m. Now people waited for my decisions. At 9:30, Grant called. "Just read the final projections for Austin," he said, his voice tinged with something almost like awe. "If this lands the way we think it will, we're talking 8 figures within 3 years." I smiled faintly into my coffee. "Then let's make it land." He laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "You seem lighter today." "I am," I admitted. "Something clicked." "Good," he said softly, "because they don't get to take anything else from you." When the call ended, I felt that small spark flare brighter. This was the first week where my focus wasn't fractured by old wounds. There was no replay of arguments, no echo of insults, no sting of rewritten narratives. The family drama had become background noise, static fading behind the sound of my own momentum. By noon, 2 new partnership deals had been finalized. Contracts signed, funds transferred, systems scheduled for deployment. I moved through each meeting with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. It felt like someone had quietly removed a weight from my shoulders, one I didn't know I'd been carrying. I finished a call with the executive board of a retail conglomerate who wanted to integrate our automation suite into their logistics pipeline. They approved the contract. They wanted to move fast. They wanted me to lead the rollout. "Your work is extraordinary," one of the directors had said. If my parents had heard those words, they would have dismissed them. Called it tech jargon. Suggested the man was exaggerating. They would have found a way to shrink the compliment until it fit inside the vision they had of me, small enough to manage, dismiss, or pity. But they weren't here. And I no longer needed their approval to let the praise sink in. Around 3, my assistant forwarded a personal invitation from a top-tier podcast for women in tech and entrepreneurship. The host was someone I admired, sharp, respected, and genuinely invested in amplifying women's voices. 2 years ago, I would have said no, afraid the exposure might complicate the fragile separation I kept between myself and my family's expectations. Now, I clicked accept. An hour later, another invitation arrived, this time from a well-known business magazine. They were preparing a feature on under 35 female founders who built multi-million-dollar companies without outside investors. A younger version of me would have cried. The current version simply breathed deeply and typed my reply. Yes, I would be honored. Condition: no references to my family. I didn't owe them my spotlight. As the day shifted into evening, I made myself a simple dinner, roasted vegetables and lemon chicken, and turned on soft jazz, letting the music fill the warm corners of my home. I moved slowly through the space, adjusting a plant by the window, organizing a shelf, lighting a candle on the coffee table. Everything felt peaceful, intentional, mine. Halfway through tidying my office, my phone buzzed again. A new email from the forensic accountant. Subject: final review attached. I sat down. The full report was far more detailed than the preliminary findings I'd seen before. The lodge's debts, the loans, the hidden transfers, the overdue taxes, every line of fabricated stability now ripped clean open. But something else stood out. A pattern in the dates. The financial spiral began exactly when Brielle opened her aesthetic center. Her dream wasn't just failing, it was sinking everything around it. The family had poured money into her. Money they didn't have. Money they stole from me. Money they stole from themselves. Every time Brielle overspent, they borrowed. Every time her profits dropped, they blamed me. Every time she made a mistake, they cleaned it up with invisible glue. But they had glued so many cracks for so long that the structure wasn't a business anymore. It was a fragile illusion waiting to collapse. And it would collapse. Soon. I took a breath. A long, steady breath. There was no satisfaction in seeing the numbers. There was no cruelty in me. Only clarity. The truth was simple. They had built their world on denial. They had built her success on sand. They had built their comfort on my silence. And now the tide was coming in. I spent the rest of the evening reviewing projections, sipping tea as the city outside dimmed into twilight. When my eyes grew tired, I closed the files and walked to the window. The water was dark, but the reflected lights shimmered like constellations. I whispered softly, "You thought I wouldn't see." Not as accusation, as acknowledgement. By the time midnight approached, my focus had sharpened into something new, something almost peaceful. I no longer wanted their apology. I no longer wanted their understanding. I no longer wanted to fix anything between us. What I wanted was distance, truth, freedom, and the life I had built, one they could no longer distort or diminish. Standing there, watching the lights flicker across the water, I felt a shift inside me, subtle but absolute. They thought I was still the daughter who waited at the edge of the table for a scrap of acknowledgement. But I wasn't waiting anymore. I was positioning, preparing, becoming the woman they always feared I might be. A woman who no longer needed them. A woman who no longer bowed her head when they said her name. A woman who knew exactly what she was capable of. Week 4 wasn't an ending. It was ignition. And when the spark finally met the fuel they had been pouring for years, it would not be my world that caught fire. It would be theirs. The night after the gala, Seattle felt heavy with fog, the kind that blurred the outlines of buildings and softened the glow of streetlights. But inside my penthouse, nothing felt soft. Not anymore. The applause from the gala still echoed faintly in my bones. The moment the spotlight found my face, the collective gasp from my parents' table, my sister's frozen smile cracking under the weight of truth. For the first time in my life, I had been undeniable, seen, named, celebrated, and they had been forced to watch. But the high of that moment had faded into something colder, steadier. The fight wasn't over just because my parents finally realized who I really was. Their shock was only the beginning. Their consequences were still coming. When I opened my laptop, an email sat waiting in my inbox. Subject: Vance Lodge, default status confirmed. My heart didn't race. It didn't even lift. It simply settled deeper into my chest, like a stone dropping into still water. I clicked. The bank had officially flagged the renovation loan as delinquent. Foreclosure proceedings had been authorized. Contact with the guarantor, me, was now redirected through the legal team. The property would move to distressed acquisition status within weeks. The lodge wasn't just in trouble, it was already gone. And the part that made me inhale quietly, slowly, wasn't the loss. It was what came next. The private equity firm I had quietly partnered with sent their update minutes later. We are prepared to move forward with acquiring all distressed Vance assets. Please confirm your timeline. All distressed assets. The lodge, the adjoining land parcel, the workshop space my father used for decades, and the commercial lease tied to Brielle's failing clinic. I sat back in my chair, fingers curled lightly against the edge of the table. Snow drifted past the window like feathers shaken loose from a pillow. But there was nothing soft about tonight, nothing fragile, only clarity. My family had used me as collateral. Now they were the ones about to become collateral in the financial world I navigated every day. I closed my laptop. The next morning, Alexandra arrived at my building dressed in charcoal wool, exuding that quiet authority she carried everywhere. She placed a binder on my dining table, a sleek black folder embossed with a single silver word: disposition. Inside were the documents for the acquisition, the legal protections, the fraud affidavits, and every piece of evidence needed to sever financial ties with my family permanently. She flipped it open with calm precision. "The assets transfer to you the moment the auction triggers," she said. "It's clean, it's lawful, and it's final." I nodded. "Good." "There's something else," she added, sliding a document across the table. "Your parents tried to contact the bank after the freeze. They attempted to claim you gave verbal consent for the loan." I almost laughed. "Of course they did." She met my eyes. "They know they're cornered, and they're trying to rewrite the story before the consequences reach them." "Then let's make sure they can't rewrite anything," I replied. Her smile was thin and approving. After she left, I took a slow walk through my penthouse, letting my thoughts unwind. The hardwood floors were warm beneath my socks. The windows glowed with winter light. Everything felt grounded, intentional, mine. No part of me wanted revenge. What I wanted was an ending, a clean one, a final one, a truthful one. The kind that didn't hinge on emotion, only consequence. In the afternoon, Grant arrived with a report that painted the collapse of my family's world in numbers, charts, and timelines. The lodge was weeks away from default beyond recovery. My parents' contractor business had lost 30% of its clients in 6 months. Suppliers weren't renewing contracts, and Brielle's clinic had missed payroll again. "They're unraveling," he said quietly. "They unraveled themselves," I corrected. "And now," he continued, tapping the folder, "you own every piece of what they built with fraudulent signatures." I didn't smile. I didn't flinch. I didn't feel triumph. What I felt was justice. Not the loud kind, not the kind that demands attention, the quiet kind, the kind that arrives with undeniable truth. Before Grant left, he paused in my doorway. "You know," he said, Most people in your position would be consumed with anger, but you're steady. I spent my whole life being shaken by them, I replied. I'm done shaking. The next morning I woke before dawn. Golden light had not yet touched the water outside, but the sky had softened from black to slate. I made tea, wrapped myself in a shawl, and stared at the city in the cold stillness. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my sister. We heard something happened with the bank. We need to talk, please. A second bubble popped up immediately. Mom is sick about it. Dad is furious. Please answer. I didn't answer. Another message. Mara, if you're doing something to hurt us, please stop. I exhaled. A slow, steady breath. They still thought I was reacting emotionally. They still believed they were the victims. They still believed the consequences of their actions were a personal attack rather than the inevitable outcome of their own choices. They didn't understand that I wasn't doing anything to them. Their signatures had done everything already. At noon, another message came. This time from my mother. Honey, I know you're upset, but you're taking things too far. We are your family. We built that lodge for all of us someday. A pause. If you wanted to help, you could have just said so. If you're angry, we can fix this. Don't let outsiders destroy our family. A surge of cold clarity swept through me. Outsiders. She meant Alexandra. She meant Grant. She meant anyone who wasn't them, anyone who refused to play by their manipulative script. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I typed nothing. Not because I didn't have words, but because the time for words had passed. The time for consequences had arrived. That evening, as twilight washed purple across the sky, I received the notification I had been waiting for. Vance Lodge officially entered foreclosure status. Acquisition is approved for immediate action. Ownership transfer pending signature. Beneficial owner, M. Vance Holdings, LLC. Managing partner, Mara Elaine Vance. I sat still for a moment, letting the truth settle. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just truth. They had stolen my name to save their world. Now my name was written on the deed of everything they feared losing. I stood and walked to the window. The harbor below shimmered with lights reflecting across dark water. A ferry horn echoed faintly in the distance, deep and resonant. And in that quiet, I whispered to myself, they burned the bridge. I just walked across the ashes. Tomorrow they would learn the full truth. Tomorrow I would face them. Not as the daughter they dismissed, but as the woman they created through their own cruelty. Tomorrow the reckoning began. And I felt nothing but ready. I chose the restaurant intentionally. Warm lighting, soft jazz, linen tablecloths, a space elegant enough to keep tempers contained but intimate enough that no one could pretend they didn't hear the truth. When I arrived, the hostess led me to a private alcove near the back, where a round table sat beneath a chandelier shaped like falling glass leaves. I took the seat facing the entrance. It felt symbolic somehow, letting them walk toward the version of me they had never truly met. They arrived 9 minutes late. My mother walked in first, wrapped in a cream coat that tried too hard to look expensive. Her eyes flicked across the room until they found mine, lighting briefly with relief or calculation, I couldn't tell which. My father followed behind her, stiff in his navy jacket, wearing the expression of a man preparing to negotiate a contract he didn't fully understand. And then came my sister Brielle, sequins on her sleeves catching the light, her smile sweet enough to crack a tooth, her fiancé trailing behind her like an obedient shadow. I didn't stand. I didn't have to. Mara, my mother breathed, already reaching for me. You look beautiful tonight. Thank you, I said simply, offering a thin smile but not her embrace. We sat. A waiter materialized with water and menus. Small talk sputtered awkwardly. My father complimented the decor. My mother remarked on the wine list. Brielle searched my expression as if looking for weakness to exploit. After the waiter stepped away, my father cleared his throat. "We're glad you invited us," he said, folding his hands in front of him as though preparing for family prayer. "There's been confusion, some misunderstandings. Your mother has been very upset." "I'm not upset," she snapped softly. "I'm worried. There's a difference." I met her gaze without flinching. "You're worried about yourselves." Her lips parted in offense. "Mara, that's not fair." "It's accurate," I replied. A beat of silence settled over the table, thick and uneven. My sister leaned forward, her voice dipped in honey. "Look, I know things got tense at Christmas, and maybe we all said things we shouldn't have. But we're family. We should fix this. Together." Together. The word tasted like irony. I reached into my bag, pulled out the leather folder, and placed it on the center of the table. The sound of it hitting the wood was soft, but it carried more weight than anything said so far. My father's eyes narrowed. "What's that?" "Everything," I said. I opened it slowly, letting the pages fan out like a stack of verdicts waiting to be read. I slid the first document to my father, his face drained of color. "This," he whispered, staring at the page. "This is our shop, our land, our home." "It was," I said calmly. "As of this morning, it belongs to a private equity firm I have majority control over." My mother's breath hitched. No, that can't be right. She grabbed a document with trembling fingers, scanning the lines as if the words might rearrange themselves out of mercy. How could they take it? How could they just— "You defaulted," I said. "You forged my signature to secure a loan you couldn't afford, and you defaulted. That's how." Brielle's voice cracked as she nearly spit out her protest. I didn't ask them to do that. I didn't even know what they— "Your clinic was funded with the loan," I said evenly. "And the accountant found the transfers. Every one of them." My father slammed a hand on the table. "That's enough. You're not going to sit there and accuse us like criminals." I tilted my head. "What would you call forging someone's signature on a $300,000 loan?" His jaw flexed. He looked down. My mother covered her face with her hand. "Mara, honey, why would you do this to us?" I inhaled slowly, letting the words settle before responding. "I didn't do anything to you. You did this to yourselves. I just stopped carrying the weight of your choices." The waiter approached cautiously with a bottle of wine. I waved him away. This was not a night for distractions. I slid 2 more documents across the table. "These are your options." Brielle reached first, scanning them with shaking hands. Her mascara smudged at the corners of her eyes. My father read aloud, voice tight. "Option 1, sell all business assets and the property back at fair market value. Option 2, lease the home and workshop for 6 months, market rate, no extensions." My mother's jaw fell open. "Lease? Lease our own home? How could you think we would— "You told me to go live in the streets," I reminded her quietly. Her mouth snapped shut. Brielle's eyes were wide and glossy. "So you're— what? Punishing us? Teaching us a lesson?" I almost pitied her. Almost. "No," I said softly. "I'm drawing a boundary, one you never allowed me to have." My father leaned forward, scowling now, trying to regain some sense of authority. "You're going to destroy this family over a misunderstanding?" "A misunderstanding," I repeated, raising a brow. "Forging my name wasn't a misunderstanding. Lying to your church about me wasn't a misunderstanding. Calling me useless at Christmas wasn't a misunderstanding." My mother flinched. My father looked away. "And telling me to go live in the streets?" I added quietly. "What would you call that?" Silence, thick and suffocating. My sister reached across the table like she had every right to touch me. "Mara, please," she whispered. "We're family. We can fix this." I stared at her hand until she withdrew it. "You should have thought about fixing things before using my life as your safety net." Her chin trembled. For the first time, she looked small, human. My father exhaled shakily, his voice barely audible. "We didn't know you were doing well. If you'd told us—" "You didn't want to know," I said simply. My mother's eyes brimmed with tears. "We were trying to help you grow up. We were worried about your choices." "No," I replied. "You were worried about your image." Her throat worked. She had no argument because there was none. Then I slid the final document toward them. "This one is not optional." My father frowned. "What is this?" "A declaration," I said. "You acknowledge that you used my identity without consent. I agree not to pursue criminal charges. We legally separate our finances, permanently." My mother gasped. "We can't sign that. People will know—" "No one will know," I said, "unless you force me to make it known." My father swallowed hard, his voice barely steady. "If we sign this, you walk away? Just like that?" "For the first time," I answered, "yes." The waiter hovered nearby, unsure whether to approach. I lifted my hand slightly, signaling him to wait. He withdrew. My mother's voice shook like a brittle ornament. "We never meant to hurt you." I met her gaze directly. "You never meant to stop." Brielle wiped her cheek, mascara streaking down her skin. "So this is it? You're just cutting us off?" "I'm refusing to be your collateral anymore." My father leaned back slowly. His shoulders sagged in a way I had never seen before. Something inside him seemed to crumble, not from defeat, but from the realization that he no longer had any power over me. My mother looked at me with stunned disbelief. "Mara, where did you learn to be this cold?" I held her gaze. "I'm not being cold," I said. "I'm being done." A long silence followed. Then I stood, slipping the folder back into my bag. "You told me to go live in the streets," I said quietly. "So I chose to buy the streets instead." My chair legs whispered against the marble floor as I stepped back. None of them reached for me this time. None of them called my name. None of them tried to stop me. I walked out of the restaurant into the cool night air, the door closing behind me with a soft thud that felt like the final line of a chapter I had waited my whole life to finish. And as I stepped onto the sidewalk, a strange peace settled into me. Not joy, not triumph, just freedom. 6 months later, I woke to the soft shimmer of early sunlight spilling across my bedroom ceiling, the kind of light that didn't demand anything from me. It simply existed, quiet, warm, steady. Seattle had shifted into late spring, and the mornings carried a crisp brightness that felt almost symbolic, like the city itself understood I had finally made room to breathe. I stretched beneath the covers, listening to the familiar hum of the heating vents and the faint clatter of someone walking their dog on the sidewalk far below. There was no dread in my chest, no weight pressing into my ribs, no instinct to brace for impact the moment my eyes opened. That alone felt like a luxury. After a long shower, I walked barefoot into the kitchen, brewed a cup of tea, and opened the balcony doors. The scent of the water drifted up immediately, salty, cool, comforting. Ferries were already gliding across the bay, leaving thin white trails behind them. I leaned against the railing and just watched. For the first time in my adult life, the quiet didn't feel like an accusation. It felt like a beginning. By mid-morning, I was at my desk reviewing updates from the Austin Innovation Hub. The team had completed their first retail automation pilot with remarkable success, tripling the client's workflow speed. The New York office was thriving too, already onboarding 5 new enterprise partnerships. Grant sent a message with a line that made me smile. We're only just getting started. Work no longer felt like escape. It felt like purpose. It felt like mine. Around noon, Megan called. She never called with drama, only with honesty. Her voice crackled through the speaker, casual but gentle. Hey, thought you might want an update. I didn't ask. I didn't need to. She continued anyway. Your parents sold the house last month. They took the buyout option. It was enough for a small place in Sandport, a 2-bedroom near the old marketplace. I pictured it, not out of spite, but out of recognition. Smaller, quieter, less adorned with the illusions my parents once lived for. A place where no one expected them to host grand Christmas dinners or carry the weight of reputation like a fragile vase. How are they? I asked, surprising myself with how open my voice sounded. They keep to themselves, she said. Church friends still talk to them, but the spotlight is gone. It's like they're learning to exist without an audience. That image landed in a place inside me I didn't realize was still tender. And Brielle? I finally asked. Megan exhaled softly. She closed the clinic. The space has new tenants now. A small bakery run by a couple who make the best lavender scones you've ever had. I smiled faintly. Of course. She's working retail for now, Megan added carefully. She's humbled, scared, figuring things out. Good, I said. Not triumphant, not cold, just honest. She needed that. After we hung up, I sat for a while, staring at the glow of my computer screen, but not really reading the text. I wasn't angry. I wasn't satisfied. I wasn't anything sharp or bitter. I was simply done. And in that doneness, there was space to breathe more deeply than I ever had before. Later that afternoon, I walked through the commercial block that used to house my father's workshop. The building had been refurbished by its new tenants. Soft yellow lights glowed through the windows, and a hand-painted sign reading Harbor Clay Studio hung above the door. A young woman stepped outside carrying a tray of freshly glazed mugs. She smiled at me as she passed, and I smiled back. The world had moved on, just as it should. I continued walking until I reached the bakery Megan mentioned. The smell of warm sugar and citrus drifted out the open door. I didn't go inside. I only stood long enough to absorb the quiet truth that life continued, even when the structures holding it up had crumbled. When I finally returned home that evening, the living room was bathed in orange light. I poured a glass of white wine, curled up on the couch with a blanket, and closed my eyes. I had spent so much of my life trying to earn love that was never meant for me, trying to fit into a version of family that never made space for who I truly was, trying to make myself smaller so they could feel larger, safer, more in control. But the moment I stopped trying, everything changed. I realized that the people who truly loved me, the people who showed up, encouraged me, worked beside me, believed in my work, weren't tied to me by blood at all. My found family was made of colleagues who had become confidants, neighbors who had become weekly companions, friends who had become anchors. They saw me. They valued me. They chose me. And in choosing to walk away from the people who never did, I had chosen myself. 2 weeks later, I hosted Friendsgiving. Not in November, but in late spring, because when you rebuild your life, you get to redefine your own traditions. The table was covered in homemade dishes brought by friends from every corner of my life. Laughter bounced off the walls. Stories overlapped. Jokes layered themselves into the air like music. Halfway through dessert, my mentor raised her glass. To Mara, she said, a woman who finally stopped living in the narrative others wrote for her and chose to write her own. My throat tightened, not with grief, not with pain, but with something warm and steady, a fullness I had never felt at the Vance family table. I stood, lifting my glass. To the people who showed me what family actually looks like, I said. The room erupted in applause, and as I looked around the table, faces glowing with candlelight, smiles soft and genuine, I realized something vital. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't victory. This wasn't even closure. This was freedom. The next morning, I walked the pier alone, the early sun glistening across the water. The air smelled like sea salt and new beginnings. I paused at the railing, watching the waves fold over one another. You were never wrong, I told myself quietly. You were never the problem. You were never the burden. You were never the failure. You were simply waiting to become who you were always meant to be. I stood there for a long time, letting the wind lift the last remnants of old wounds from my shoulders. And when I finally walked home, I did so without looking back. If you've followed my story until this moment, thank you for being here. Stories like this are never just about revenge or collapse. They're about rediscovering who you are when everything that tried to break you finally falls away. If any part of this journey spoke to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment, share what resonated, or tell me your own experience. And if you want more stories like this, of strength, justice, family drama, and those unforgettable twists, make sure to like this video and subscribe so you never miss what comes next.